It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a well-deserved break from the stress of classes and exams. 6 college friends, all in their early 20s, had planned the vacation for months, carefully choosing an exotic coastal town abroad known for its vibrant nightlife and scenic beaches. They had saved up together, split the costs, and mapped out an itinerary filled with adventure and relaxation. For most of them, it was their first time leaving the country without family, and the thrill of independence made the excitement even stronger. They boarded the flight full of laughter, snapping selfies, sharing stories, and dreaming about the memories they'd make. Their parents, though slightly nervous, were reassured by daily check-ins and shared locations via phone apps. The first 2 days were filled with beach photos, food pictures, and short video clips on social media, showing the group smiling in swimsuits, holding drinks, and dancing under string lights at beach parties. Then, suddenly, the post stopped. At first, no one thought much of it. After all, it wasn't uncommon to go offline while traveling, especially in areas with spotty service. But as hours turned into a full day, then too, families began to grow uneasy. Messages went unread, calls rang unanswered, and their phone locations froze in one spot on the edge of a dockyard. Worry turned into fear as time stretched with no word. One of the students' mothers reached out to the local embassy, and the official missing persons reports were filed. Friends back home shared missing posters on social media, and what was once an exciting getaway began to feel like a chilling mystery. No one could explain how 6 young people could vanish without a trace in a place filled with tourists and cameras. All that remained was a gnawing sense that something had gone terribly wrong. As the silence grew longer, concern turned into desperation. The families of the missing students flew to the country themselves, determined to find answers. They walked the beaches their children had once photographed, handed out flyers in crowded markets, and visited hostels and bars hoping someone had seen them. Local authorities launched an investigation, but progress was slow, hampered by bureaucratic hurdles and language barriers. The dockyard, where the phones had last pinged, was a sprawling maze of warehouses, stacked containers, and heavy machinery, a place not easily searched without proper clearance. Despite repeated requests, port officials initially dismissed the urgency, claiming no signs of unauthorized entry or foul play. Volunteers joined in the search, combing through nearby areas, while international media began to pick up the story, drawing public attention to the case. Yet, each lead seemed to fade into another dead end. Rumors began to swirl. Some believed the students had staged their disappearance, while others suspected a robbery or kidnapping. Surveillance footage from the night they vanished showed only a grainy image of the group walking near the port's edge, laughing and unaware of what lay ahead. No vehicles followed them, no struggle was recorded, just a shadowy clip that raised more questions than answers. The parents appeared on talk shows and news interviews, pleading for information, their voices cracking under the weight of helplessness. Social media campaigns with hashtags calling for justice and awareness trended for weeks, but no solid evidence emerged. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and hope began to dim. The once bright, vibrant photos of the students became symbols of a painful mystery that no one could solve. And as the seasons changed, the question still echoed everywhere: how could 6 people disappear into thin air, leaving nothing behind but silence? Eventually, with mounting pressure from both the families and international media, local authorities took a closer look at the last known digital footprints of the students. The frozen phone locations were all clustered around the same area, an old, less used section of the port's dockyard, just outside the main security perimeter. It was a grimy, industrial zone, filled with rusting cranes, weather-worn shipping containers, and stretches of cracked concrete. The kind of place most tourists would have no reason to visit. The signal data suggested the group had lingered there for nearly half an hour before all connections suddenly dropped. No further calls, no messages, no GPS pings. This sudden silence at such a specific spot raised new suspicions. Investigators scoured old footage from security cameras mounted high on the dock's outer perimeter, but the view of that particular area was limited, partially blocked by stacked containers and equipment. Still, in a few brief frames, investigators spotted distant figures walking toward the edge of the port late that night. The footage was grainy and the angle poor, but it matched the timeline. The families were shown the clip, their hearts sinking as they identified familiar outlines, movements, even the way their children carried their bags. The students weren't running or being chased, they appeared calm, even curious. It was as if someone had led them there, or they were exploring something they believed was harmless. But from that moment on, there was nothing. No cameras inside the maze of containers, no guards patrolling that late at night, and no witnesses who saw them leave. Authorities began to treat the area as a possible crime scene, but it had been months by then. Containers had come and gone, equipment had been moved, and any clues that might have been there were likely lost or buried. Still, a small group of officers and private investigators refused to give up. That remote corner of the port, once overlooked, had become the dark center of a growing mystery. It was the last place the students had been seen, and now it was the key to understanding what had happened to them. 4 months after the students had vanished, the case had begun to fade from headlines, buried under newer stories and fresher tragedies. But for the families and a few dedicated investigators, the search had never truly stopped. One of them, a port security consultant hired privately by a desperate parent, insisted on reviewing the manifests and movements of shipping containers that had been in the area the night the students disappeared. Most containers had long since been loaded onto ships or cleared through customs, but one stood out, an old, rust-streaked container that had no record of departure and had somehow slipped through the cracks. It sat on the far end of the yard, half buried behind 2 larger stacks, its number faded and nearly unreadable. It had been overlooked for months, assumed to be empty or awaiting removal. But when investigators finally approached it, something about it felt wrong. The lock was rusted, but the seal appeared newer than the rest of the unit. There was no identifying shipping label, and the surrounding area smelled faintly of rot. A team was called in to force it open, and as the heavy doors creaked apart, a wave of stale, suffocating air spilled out. Inside, the darkness was thick and undisturbed. Flashlights revealed discarded plastic wrappers, half-empty water bottles, and the crumpled remains of clothing. A torn university lanyard lay in the corner, along with a small, dented camcorder, its battery long dead. At first, the investigators said nothing, but the silence that hung in the air told everyone what they already feared. This wasn't just another abandoned container. This was a tomb. The items inside matched those owned by the missing students. The evidence was undeniable. For months, the answers had been sitting there, hidden in plain sight, locked behind steel in a forgotten corner of the port. And now, the truth was beginning to claw its way into the light. The discovery of the shipping containers sent shockwaves through both the local community and international media. For investigators, it was no longer a question of whether something terrible had happened, it was now a matter of uncovering exactly what. The items inside painted a haunting picture of what the students had endured. Scattered across the cold metal floor were backpacks, cracked phone screens, and worn notebooks filled with frantic handwriting. One page, torn and smudged with moisture, bore a desperate message: "We're trapped. No signal. Please find us." It was dated just 2 days after the group had vanished. That note alone shattered any remaining hope that their disappearance had been voluntary. Someone, or something, had lured them into the container and locked them in, leaving them to slowly fade from the world's attention as life outside carried on. The camcorder, surprisingly intact despite its battered exterior, was handed over to forensic experts. After carefully recharging and retrieving its footage, the first few clips showed the group joking around, filming themselves as they wandered near the dock. But as the recordings continued, their tone shifted. The laughter turned to confusion, and then to fear. One clip showed them inside the container, the door still open, as one of them inspected something out of view. The next cut was sudden, darkness. Muffled voices, someone crying, another person calling for help. The final video was silent for several minutes, just a black screen, until a faint voice whispered, "I think they forgot about us," before the battery died completely. For the families, watching the footage was agony. The students had been alive, trapped, terrified, and waiting for a rescue that never came. Investigators concluded that the container had likely been sealed intentionally, but the motive remained unclear. Smuggling gone wrong. A cruel prank that turned fatal. Theories swirled, but none could explain the utter disregard for human life. The container, once just a forgotten hunk of steel, had become the stage for a slow, silent tragedy. And now, the world was finally beginning to listen. As investigators pieced together the contents of the container and the harrowing footage, one chilling possibility began to take shape. that the students had been lured, trapped, and left to die as part of a larger, more sinister operation. Evidence from the camcorder and the scene suggested the group hadn't simply wandered into the container out of curiosity. One of the students could be heard mentioning someone who had told them about a shortcut, or a cool place to film. This offhand comment, muffled in the background of the video, became a crucial clue. It implied the group had been led there by someone they trusted, or at least didn't find threatening. Investigators began digging into reports of human trafficking activity and port-related crimes in the area. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 2 years, several individuals had gone missing near the same port, including 2 young tourists whose cases had gone cold. In each instance, there had been vague sightings of a man offering rides or guiding people to off-limit areas for photo ops, or shortcuts to the beach. Although there was still no direct evidence linking the students' deaths to a trafficking ring, experts believed they may have been collateral damage in a smuggling operation. It was theorized that the container had been prepared for transporting people illegally, perhaps as part of a broader human trafficking network, but for some reason, it was never retrieved or opened. Whether the students were mistaken for intended victims or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time remained unclear. Fingerprints inside the container belonged solely to the students, offering no direct link to a perpetrator. However, a scrap of fabric wedged between the door hinge, different in color and texture from anything the students wore, was sent for testing. There was also a partially erased footprint outside the container that did not match any of theirs. These tiny details hinted at the presence of someone else, someone who had vanished without a trace. The idea that the students were left to die as a result of a crime gone wrong sparked outrage across the globe. Protests erupted in front of government buildings and embassies, demanding justice and reform. The parents, who had once clung to hope, now found themselves fighting not just for answers but for accountability. This wasn't an accident. It was negligence, indifference, and evil wrapped in a steel box. And the world had to know it. The forensic teams worked tirelessly over the next several weeks, carefully analyzing the contents of the container and collecting every shred of potential evidence. DNA samples were taken from hair strands, fingerprints, and bits of dried biological material found on the floor. Each test confirmed the heartbreaking truth: remains found inside the container belonged to the 6 missing college students. Their bodies had long since decomposed due to the sealed, oxygen-deprived environment and the passage of time, leaving behind only skeletal remains and fragments of clothing. Personal items like bracelets, student IDs, and phone cases helped with identification, and in some cases, dental records were used to confirm identities. The official reports stated that the cause of death was likely a combination of suffocation, dehydration, and heat exhaustion. The container had essentially become an oven, absorbing sunlight during the day and locking in the heat. Trapped without air, water, or means of escape, the students had endured unthinkable suffering in their final hours. When the families received the confirmation, it shattered the last sliver of hope they had been holding onto. Candlelight vigils were held simultaneously in 6 different cities, each honoring a young life cut short. Photographs of the students, smiling, full of life, wearing caps and gowns from graduation or posing at campus events, were displayed as mourners left flowers, letters, and candles in silent tribute. News of the confirmed deaths reignited media interest, and the story once again dominated headlines around the world. Questions swirled about how such a tragic oversight could happen in a supposedly secure, internationally monitored port. There was fury, too, anger at the port authorities for their negligence, at law enforcement for their delays, and at a system that allowed a shipping container to sit unnoticed for months with human lives locked inside. International pressure mounted, and government officials were forced to respond. Some offered condolences, while others promised internal investigations. But for the grieving families, apologies were not enough. They wanted answers. They wanted someone held responsible. Their children had suffered a slow, silent death while the world moved on. The discovery of the remains brought some closure, but it also deepened the pain. Now there was no more wondering. No more room for hope. Only the certainty of loss, and the unrelenting need to make sure no one else would ever have to endure the same fate. The aftermath of the discovery triggered a wave of outrage and sorrow that swept across nations. The tragedy of the 6 college students, once a painful mystery, had become a symbol of systemic failure, an echo of how negligence, bureaucracy, and apathy could cost innocent lives. Public reaction was swift and fierce. Protests erupted in front of the Port Authority headquarters, not only in the country where the incident occurred but also in the students' home countries. Candlelit marches wound through college campuses and city streets, led by classmates, professors, and parents who demanded justice and accountability. News outlets aired emotional interviews with the victims' families, some of whom choked back tears while others spoke with fierce determination, vowing to fight for change and memory of their children. Their grief had transformed into a mission. They weren't going to let their children's deaths be forgotten or brushed aside by procedural excuses. In response, several major ports around the world initiated emergency audits of unregistered and stationary containers. Security protocols were rewritten, and advanced tracking systems were introduced to monitor container activity more transparently. Legislators proposed new international port safety agreements that would require mandatory checks on inactive containers every 30 days and stricter regulation of access to restricted port zones. Universities also re-evaluated their student travel policies, implementing better emergency contact systems and offering training on avoiding high-risk areas while abroad. A scholarship fund was established in the names of the 6 students, aimed at supporting young people who wanted to explore the world safely and pursue international studies. Still, amid all the reforms and promises, a somber shadow lingered. The empty dorm rooms, the unclaimed diplomas, and the silence where once there had been laughter served as daily reminders of what had been lost. The final moments of those 6 lives had been lived in darkness, but their memory now lived on as a spark for change. Their story had reshaped how ports operated, how students traveled, and how authorities responded to missing persons cases. In death, they had forced the world to confront its blind spots. And in doing so, they became more than victims, they became a call to action.